For 38 years, Grace let Harold take the credit for saving their church. But now, with Harold fighting for his life and his sealed will waiting to be opened, the secret he buried is about to reveal who the janitor really was. The altar. Daniel had remained several pews behind her for nearly an hour. He did not interrupt. He did not ask another question. For once, he understood that silence could be more respectful than curiosity. At last, Grace rose. Her knees trembled slightly as she steadied herself against the communion rail. Daniel stepped forward. "Me help you, all right. Been saying that all day." Grace picked up her handbag. "One day you may believe me." Did not smile. "Harold told me not to let you leave." Grace looked toward the cross. "He was afraid of you leaving, of losing the chance to finish what he started." Studied her carefully. "What did he start?" Grace's eyes returned to him. "A confession." Daniel could respond. Her phone rang. The sound echoed through the quiet sanctuary. Grace removed the old device from her handbag. "Hello?" Her expression changed. Daniel watched the remaining color leave her face. "Yes." A pause. "I understand." She ended the call. "Was it the hospital?" Grace nodded. "Harold survived the night." Released the breath he had been holding. "That's good. They're taking him into surgery." Her voice remained calm, but one hand tightened around the phone. "Vanessa asked me to come." Frowned. "Vanessa?" She said. "Harold woke briefly and asked for me." The hospital corridor was quiet when Grace arrived. Daniel walked beside her. Vanessa stood outside Harold's room with her arms folded tightly across her chest. David waited near the window, staring down at the parking lot. James Carter sat alone with the sealed envelope resting across his knees. The moment Vanessa saw Grace, she stepped forward. "Father asked for you." Grace stopped. "I was told." Vanessa's eyes moved over Grace's simple cardigan, worn shoes, and old handbag. For years she had barely noticed those details. Now she studied them as though they concealed answers. "Why?" Grace did not reply. "Why would my father ask for you before surgery?" Daniel stepped between them slightly. "Vanessa, this isn't the time. It may be the only time." Grace's gaze remained steady. "Your father and I have known each other for a long time." "Then you've been alive." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Were you involved with him?" David turned from the window. "Vanessa." "No, I want an answer." Grace's expression hardened. "Careful what you accuse people of when fear is speaking for you." Vanessa stared at her. "Then tell me the truth." Grace looked toward Harold's closed hospital room door. "The truth belongs to your father." James finally stood. Not entirely. Everyone turned toward him. The attorney held the sealed envelope firmly. "Mr. Bennett made certain of that." Vanessa pointed toward it. "What is inside?" James shook his head. "I cannot open it unless the condition he specified is met." "Condition? If he does not return?" Corridor fell silent. David lowered his eyes. Vanessa's anger weakened for a moment, replaced by fear. Before anyone spoke again, a nurse opened Harold's door. "He's awake, but only one person can enter." Vanessa stepped forward immediately. "I'm his daughter." The nurse looked at her chart. "He requested Grace Holloway." Vanessa froze. Grace slowly walked past her. Harold lay beneath a thin hospital blanket. An oxygen tube rested beneath his nose. His face looked pale, but his eyes were open. Grace stopped beside the bed. "You always did enjoy making an entrance." A faint smile touched his lips. "You came. You asked." Glanced toward the closed door. "They are angry, frightened." "So was I." Grace pulled a chair closer but did not sit. "Why did you ask Daniel to keep me from leaving?" "Because you would." "You don't know that." "I know you." Grace looked away. Harold struggled to lift one hand. "Sit down." She remained standing. "You changed your will without telling me. I knew you'd refuse. I still refuse. It isn't money. That's what you keep saying." Closed his eyes briefly. "I left them everything they expected." "The company?" "Yes." "Estate?" "Yes." "Foundation?" "Yes." "Then what concerns me?" Harold opened his eyes. "The church." Grace went still. "What did you do?" "I gave James instructions." "Harold, you asked me to keep your name out of the story." "I did. I kept your name out." His voice weakened. "I did not keep the truth out." Grace stared at him. "What does that mean?" Harold looked toward the ceiling. "For years, I thought your silence protected your humility." "It did." "No." His eyes returned to hers. "It protected my reputation." Grace said nothing. "I used your promise as a hiding place." "You admitted that already." "Publicly." Breathing became uneven. Grace finally sat beside him. "Save your strength." "I don't have strength to save." She looked at him sharply. "Speak like that." Harold smiled faintly. There she is. Woman who still cares. Grace's eyes filled, but she refused to let the tears fall. "I care because I'm not cruel. I know. That doesn't mean I forgive you. I know that too." A nurse appeared at the doorway. "We need to prepare him now." Reached for Grace's hand. She hesitated, then allowed him to hold it. "Grace, I return." "You will." "I return. I'll tell them myself." "If you don't." Harold's eyes moved toward the sealed envelope beyond the door. "Then my will tell them." Grace pulled her hand away. "You promised me." "I promised to protect your name." "You promised silence." Shook his head weakly. "No, you asked for silence. I promised I would never use your sacrifice to build my reputation." Grace stared at him. "And then I did exactly that." The nurse stepped closer. "We have to go." The bed began moving. Harold looked back at Grace. "I cannot undo 38 years." The wheels rolled toward the operating room. "I can stop the lie from living 40 more." The doors closed between them. Vanessa approached Grace immediately. "What did he say?" Grace looked at her. "He said he was sorry." "For what?" Grace's gaze moved toward James and the envelope. "Becoming the man everyone praised." Vanessa frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It will." "When?" Grace's voice became quiet. "When your father decides whether fear or truth gets the final word." 3 hours passed. No one left the hospital. David paced. Vanessa sat rigidly beside the window. Daniel prayed quietly. Grace remained alone at the far end of the waiting room. James kept the envelope beside him. Finally, the surgeon entered. Everyone stood. The procedure was successful. Moved through the room. Mr. Bennett's condition remained serious. "The next 24 hours are critical." Vanessa covered her mouth. David placed an arm around her. Grace lowered her head. James picked up the envelope. Since Harold had returned from surgery, the condition had not been met. For now, the truth would remain sealed. As the others gathered around the doctor, Daniel noticed Grace quietly moving toward the elevator. He followed her. "Where are you going?" "Home. Harold told me not to let you leave." Grace pressed the elevator button. He returned. "That doesn't mean the danger is over." "No." The elevator doors opened. Grace stepped inside. "It means the choice belongs to him again." Placed one hand between the doors. "What choice?" Grace looked directly at him. "Whether he tells the truth while he can still hear what it costs him." The doors closed. Daniel remained in the corridor. Behind him, James Carter's phone began ringing. The attorney answered. "This is James Carter." His expression slowly changed. "Who is this?" Everyone turned toward him. James listened for several seconds. Then his eyes moved toward the sealed envelope. He said quietly, "You should not have that document." Vanessa stood. "What document?" James ended the call without answering. Daniel walked toward him. "Who was it?" The attorney looked toward the elevator where Grace had disappeared. "Someone who claims to have the missing page from the church ledger." The hospital waiting room fell silent. James Carter slowly lowered his phone. No one spoke. No one breathed. Vanessa was the first to break the silence. "What missing page?" James looked at each face before answering. "Someone claims to possess the page that was removed from the church treasurer's ledger 38 years ago." Daniel stepped closer. "Page we've been searching for." James nodded. "They said they inherited it after their father's death." "Are they?" "They refused to say." "What do they want?" James looked at the sealed envelope in his hand. "They said the page belongs with what's inside this envelope." Room became quiet again. The following morning, Harold remained unconscious in the intensive care unit. Doctors were encouraged by the surgery. They were less encouraged by what followed. "The next few hours will tell us more," the physician explained. Vanessa thanked him. Grace listened without saying a word. When the doctor left, James walked toward Daniel. "I received another call. From the same person." "Yes." "What did they say?" James reached into his briefcase and removed a folded note. "Agreed to meet." "When?" "This afternoon." Unfolded the paper. "New Hope Community Church." Daniel looked surprised. "They chose the church." James nodded. "They said." He read the final sentence aloud. "Truth belongs where the lie began." Thomas slowly opened the portfolio. Inside rested one yellowed sheet of paper, the missing ledger page. The edges had darkened with age, the ink had faded. But every word remained readable. Daniel leaned closer. Near the top appeared the construction expenses. Below them, One single entry had been written in larger handwriting, full payment received underneath. A signature, not Harold Bennett, not the founding pastor, not the church treasurer. Grace looked away before anyone else noticed the name. James carefully covered the page. Yet, Vanessa stared at him. "What do you mean, not yet?" James spoke calmly. "Your father is still alive. So, he specifically instructed me that no one would learn the donor's identity unless one of two things happened." Daniel frowned. "What two things?" James looked toward the intensive care unit in his thoughts. "Either Harold tells everyone himself." He rested one hand on the sealed envelope. "Or his will does." Vanessa's patience finally broke. "This is ridiculous," her voice echoed through the fellowship hall. "My father is fighting for his life while everyone keeps speaking in riddles." She turned toward Grace. "Did you know about this?" Grace answered honestly. "Yes. You've known for 38 years. Yes. You never told anyone." "No." Why? Grace looked toward the old photograph hanging on the wall. "Because I gave my word." Vanessa's eyes filled with frustration. "To protect my father." Grace shook her head. "No." "Then who?" Grace whispered. "Myself." No one understood, not yet. Late that evening, Harold finally opened his eyes. The intensive care nurse immediately called the doctor. Within minutes, Vanessa, David, Daniel, and James entered his room. Grace remained outside. Harold noticed immediately. "Where?" His voice was weak. "Is Grace?" Daniel answered. "She's outside." Harold slowly nodded. "Good." Vanessa stepped closer. "Dad." He looked at her. "James." The attorney leaned forward. "The page." James understood. "They found it." Harold closed his eyes. "So, it's time." Harold slowly turned toward the door. "Bring." His breathing became shallow. "Grace." Daniel walked into the hallway. Grace was sitting alone beneath a window overlooking the hospital gardens. He approached quietly. "He wants to see you." Grace didn't move. Instead, she asked one question. "Did they find the page?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." Grace closed her eyes for the first time since Harold collapsed. A single tear escaped down her cheek. She stood, smoothed the wrinkles from her navy cardigan, picked up her handbag. Then whispered words that Daniel would never forget. "I prayed this day would never come." She walked toward Harold's room. Daniel remained in the hallway, watching her disappear through the door. He had spent weeks searching for the truth. Now, he wasn't sure anyone inside that hospital room was ready to hear it. Grace was sitting alone beneath a window overlooking the hospital gardens. He approached quietly. "He wants to see you." Grace didn't move. Instead, she asked one question. "Did they find the page?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." Grace closed her eyes for the first time since Harold collapsed. A single tear escaped down her cheek. She stood, smoothed the wrinkles from her navy cardigan, picked up her handbag, then whispered words that Daniel would never forget. "I prayed this day would never come." She walked toward Harold's room. Daniel remained in the hallway, watching her disappear through the door. He had spent weeks searching for the truth. Now, he wasn't sure anyone inside that hospital room was ready to hear it. Grace stood motionless beside Harold's hospital bed for several seconds. Neither of them spoke. The machines quietly monitored each heartbeat that remained. Harold looked weaker than Grace had ever seen him. Yet his eyes carried something they hadn't in decades: peace. "You came." Grace managed a faint smile. "You asked." Looked toward the closed hospital door. "Waiting." "They've been waiting for 38 years. He nodded slowly. "Too long." Grace pulled the visitor's chair closer. "You should rest." Rested behind silence long enough. His breathing remained shallow. "I don't want to leave this world the way I've lived these last decades." Grace looked at him. Behind a lie, he closed his eyes. Behind borrowed honor. Outside the room, Daniel, Vanessa, David, and James waited quietly. No one tried listening through the door. Whatever happened inside belonged to Harold and Grace, for now. Harold slowly reached toward the bedside drawer. "Help me." Grace opened it. Inside rested a small velvet pouch, not a box, not an envelope, just a worn navy blue pouch tied with an old braided cord. Grace immediately recognized it. Her hands froze. "You kept it?" Harold smiled faintly. "I couldn't throw away the only proof that I never deserved the applause." Grace untied the cord. Inside lay a simple silver key, small, old. Its edges had been worn smooth by time. Grace stared at it without speaking. 38 years disappeared from her face. Harold watched her. "You remember." "Never forgot." Harold's voice became distant. That night, rain hammered against the unfinished church roof. Water leaked through exposed beams. The bank had given them until sunrise. If the final payment wasn't made, construction would end. Everything would be lost. The congregation had gone home believing mourning would bring foreclosure. Only 4 people remained: the founding pastor, the church treasurer, Harold Bennett, and Grace Holloway. Harold swallowed painfully. I had already failed. Grace looked away. You weren't the only one crying that night. The memory returned as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. Grace had quietly removed the silver key from around her neck. She placed it on the pastor's desk. What does this open? The pastor had asked. My father's workshop. Harold remembered laughing bitterly. A workshop won't save a church. Grace looked at him. No, then she whispered words Harold never forgot. But what's inside mine? The pastor followed Grace across town that same night. Behind her small childhood home stood an old wooden building no one had entered since her father's death. Grace unlocked the weathered door. Dust filled the air. The room smelled of cedar and machine oil. The pastor looked confused, until Grace walked to the back wall. She knelt, lifted a loose floorboard, and revealed something no one expected. Not cash, not jewelry, not gold. Rows of carefully wrapped government savings bonds, investment certificates, land deeds, decades of quiet savings. Her father had spent his life preparing for a future he would never live to see. Harold's eyes filled with tears. Your father always believed, Grace finished the sentence, that whatever God placed in our hands should never own our hearts. Harold nodded. He saved for his family. Grace smiled softly. I was his family. You gave all of it. I gave what already belonged to God. Harold's voice broke. Pastor refused. Grace nodded. So did you. You remember that. I remember everything. Looked toward the ceiling. You said something. Grace quietly repeated the same words she had spoken 38 years earlier. If this building helps even one broken soul find hope, my father would call it the best investment he ever made. Silence filled the room. Outside, James looked toward the hospital chapel, talking. Daniel nodded. I think they're remembering. Vanessa folded her arms. I don't understand why my father kept all this hidden, James answered quietly, because it stopped being Grace's sacrifice. It became Harold's prison. Inside the room, Harold slowly reached for Grace's hand. I wanted everyone to know it was you. You wanted that 38 years ago. You should have fought harder. I know. Grace looked at the silver key resting in her palm. I asked for anonymity because I didn't want people thanking me. Harold lowered his head. I accepted your request. Then his voice cracked. But I accepted their praise. Grace closed her fingers around the key. And that's the difference. Harold began coughing violently. The monitor alarm sounded. A nurse hurried inside. We need everyone out. Grace stood immediately before leaving. Harold whispered one final sentence. Tomorrow. Grace leaned close. Bring everyone. His breathing slowed again. To the church. Grace searched his face. What? Harold's eyes slowly opened one final time. So I can finally return. What never belonged to me. Nurse guided Grace toward the door. She stepped into the hallway. Daniel immediately stood. What happened? Grace looked down at the small silver key still resting in her hand. Then she quietly answered, tomorrow. The truth comes home. Daniel stared at the old key. He had spent weeks searching through photographs, missing newsletters, ledgers, wills, and forgotten records, never imagining that the secret which saved New Hope Community Church had always begun with one ordinary silver key hanging around the neck of a quiet woman everyone simply called the janitor. The next morning, for the first time in nearly 4 decades, Grace Holloway did not arrive at New Hope Community Church before sunrise. The hallways remained dark. The marble floors had not yet been polished. The hymn books still waited to be arranged. Several church members noticed immediately. Where's Miss Grace? She's never late. Even Daniel felt the emptiness. The church no longer felt complete. At exactly 9 o'clock, 3 black SUVs pulled into the church parking lot. Vanessa stepped out first. David followed. Behind them came James Carter carrying the sealed envelope. Grace arrived in Daniel's car. She stepped out quietly, still holding the small silver key. the same key she had carried for 38 years. Inside the sanctuary, more than 400 people filled the pews. No one knew why everyone had been asked to come. Rumors had spread overnight. Some believed Harold had died, others thought he was retiring. No one imagined the truth. Daniel walked to the pulpit, his voice echoed softly. "Thank you all for coming." He looked toward the front pew. "Mr. Harold Bennett asked that everyone gather here today." Whispers filled the sanctuary. Daniel continued, "He cannot be with us. He left very specific instructions." He turned toward James. The attorney stood, holding both the sealed envelope and the missing ledger page. James slowly walked to the pulpit. "I have represented Harold Bennett for 25 years. Instructed me that these documents were to be presented only after one condition." He looked toward the congregation, "that he was no longer physically able to tell this story himself." Silence spread across the sanctuary. Grace lowered her eyes. James opened the envelope. Inside rested several handwritten pages. The first sentence immediately changed the room. "If you are hearing these words, then I have waited far too long." James continued reading. "For 38 years, many of you believed I saved this church. You thanked me, you honored me, you placed my name on plaques. You believed my generosity preserved New Hope Community Church." He paused, then looked directly toward Grace. "Every one of you was wrong." Gasps filled the sanctuary. James unfolded the missing ledger page. Donor's identity. He looked toward Grace. Was deliberately removed. He lifted the page higher. The faded signature became visible. Grace Holloway. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the entire church had forgotten how to breathe. James continued. "The church stood because Grace Holloway gave everything her father left her. Government bonds, land, savings accumulated over an entire lifetime. She asked for only one thing: no recognition." Grace closed her eyes. Tears quietly rolled down her face. James kept reading. "I honored her request." Then his voice slowed. "But I failed her. I allowed people to believe I was the one who saved this church. Every compliment I accepted, every standing ovation, every plaque, every speech, belonged to someone else." Across the sanctuary, people slowly turned toward Grace. Many had known her for decades. None had ever truly seen her. Harold's words continued. "If you want to know why I criticized Grace every Sunday." James stopped for a moment. The church leaned forward. "It was never because the floors were dirty. It was because every time I looked at her, I saw the truth about myself." Several people began crying. Even Vanessa covered her mouth. James read the final page. "Grace never reminded me of my failure. She never asked for recognition. She never demanded an apology. She protected my reputation better than I protected hers. She behaved like a servant, while I behaved like the man who needed saving." His voice trembled. "Today, I return what never belonged to me." James folded the papers. The sanctuary remained silent. Then something unexpected happened. No one applauded, no one stood. Instead, Grace quietly walked toward the front. She looked at Daniel, then at James, then at the congregation. She placed the small silver key on the communion table. "This," she said softly, "is all that remains of my father's workshop." She smiled gently. "My father never expected anyone to know his name, only hoped someone would know God's goodness." She looked around the sanctuary. "If today becomes about me, then Harold's confession accomplishes nothing." She pointed toward the cross. "If today becomes about God's faithfulness, then my father would finally smile." Grace turned toward the old plaque mounted beside the sanctuary wall. It read, "Church Expansion led by Elder Harold Bennett." She quietly removed it from the wall. The congregation watched in silence. She carried it to James. "Don't replace it." Vanessa looked confused. "What?" Grace smiled. "My name doesn't belong there either." Daniel frowned. "Then what should we put?" Grace looked around the sanctuary, then answered, "Nothing." Room remained still. She continued, "Every act of love needs someone's name attached to it." At that moment, the back doors opened. Everyone turned. Harold Bennett slowly entered the sanctuary, supported by two nurses. The entire church gasped. Against every medical recommendation, he had come. He walked painfully toward Grace, stopped in front of her, then, before 400 witnesses, the wealthiest man in the church, slowly knelt. The same man who had made her kneel every Sunday now knelt before her. Tears streamed down his face. "Sorry." Grace looked down at him for a long moment. She said nothing, then she reached out both hands not to help him stand but to hold his. "Forgave you, a long time ago," wept openly. "So why didn't you tell me?" Grace smiled through tears. "Because forgiveness isn't something you announce. It's something you practice." No one could hold back their tears, not Vanessa, not David, not Daniel, not James, not the choir, not the congregation. Weeks later, the church foyer looked exactly the same, the marble still shined. The stained glass windows still caught the morning sun, but one thing had changed forever. Grace no longer cleaned alone every Sunday before service. Church members arrived early, business owners, teenagers, lawyers, doctors, children, even Vanessa, each picked up a broom, a mop, or a cloth no one assigned them. They simply came because the greatest lesson New Hope Community Church had ever learned was not hidden inside a will. It was revealed through 38 years of quiet faithfulness, and every Sunday after that, before the first hymn was sung, someone would quietly unlock the church doors using an old silver key. 6 months later, Sunday morning sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows of New Hope Community Church. The familiar colors danced across the polished marble floor. The building looked exactly as it always had, yet somehow, everything had changed. Long before the first worshiper arrived, the front doors opened, not because Grace Holloway unlocked them alone, but because nearly 30 people stood waiting outside with her. Business owners, teachers, doctors, teenagers, children, retired couples. Even members who had once hurried past her without saying good morning, each carried something: a broom, a mop, a bucket, a dust cloth. No one had been asked to come. They simply did, because service had become contagious. Associate Pastor Daniel Brooks stood quietly in the foyer, watching the volunteers laugh together as they worked. One little girl tugged gently on Grace's cardigan. "Miss Grace?" Grace smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. Can I help polish the windows today?" Grace knelt beside her. "You certainly can." The little girl grinned and ran off with a spray bottle that seemed almost too large for her small hands. Daniel smiled to himself. This was what church had always been meant to look like. The old wooden plaque that once honored Harold Bennett had never returned to the wall. Neither had a plaque bearing Grace's name. Instead, a simple framed verse now hung in its place. "Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant." Matthew 20:26. No names, no titles, only scripture. Grace insisted that was enough. No one argued. Harold Bennett returned to church 3 months after leaving the hospital. He still walked with a cane. His steps were slower, his voice softer. His pride gone. Every Sunday before service he arrived early, not to inspect the floors, but to help clean them. The first time he picked up a mop, the sanctuary fell completely silent. No cameras captured the moment. No speeches were made. Harold simply smiled at Grace. She smiled back. Nothing more needed to be said. Vanessa Bennett Wells changed as well. She quietly established a scholarship for students preparing for ministry or community service. When reporters asked whose name the scholarship honored, she simply replied, "A faithful servant." She never offered another explanation. Grace never asked for one. James Carter carefully returned the missing ledger page to the church archives. This time, nothing was hidden. Beside it rested Harold's handwritten confession. Future generations would know the truth. Not so they could admire Grace, but so they would remember what humility looks like. On the first anniversary of Harold's confession, Daniel preached a message titled, "The People History Almost Forgot." He ended his sermon by holding up an old silver key. The congregation immediately recognized it. Daniel smiled. This key never opened a bank, never unlocked a treasure chest, opened a workshop. Workshop that built something far greater than a church building. Opened hearts. He carefully placed the key back into Grace's hands. "It belongs with its rightful keeper." Grace gently shook her head. "It belongs here." She placed it on the communion table, where anyone could see it, a reminder that the greatest sacrifices are often made by people whose names never appear in history books. As the choir began singing the final hymn, Grace quietly walked to the front doors. She unlocked them, stepped aside, and welcomed every person who entered with the same warm smile she had worn for nearly 40 years. Most people never noticed the silver key in her hand. They didn't need to, because by then, Everyone understood the strongest foundation New Hope Community Church had ever known was never built from bricks, or money, or recognition. It was built by quiet faithfulness, by humble service, by forgiveness, and by one ordinary woman who never wanted anyone to know her name. The choir's final hymn echoed gently through New Hope Community Church. One by one, the voices faded. The sanctuary grew still. Grace remained standing by the open doors. The old silver key rested quietly in her hand. Children laughed as they ran toward Sunday school. Families greeted one another with warm embraces. Harold watched from the front pew not as the man everyone admired, but as the man who had finally become free. He caught Grace's eye from across the sanctuary. She smiled. He smiled back. No words were needed. Some apologies are spoken, others are lived. Associate Pastor Daniel looked around the church one last time, the polished floors, the smiling volunteers, the elderly woman greeting every stranger like family, the man who once demanded perfection now quietly stacking hymn books beside a teenager. He realized something. New Hope Community Church had not been saved 38 years ago. It was being saved. Every single Sunday, not by wealth, not by influence, not by recognition, but by ordinary people choosing to serve one another. Before leaving that morning, Daniel walked to the foyer wall beneath the framed scripture. He added one final inscription, not a person's name, not a date, just a single sentence. The strongest foundations are built by the servants no one notices. Grace read it. She smiled softly, then, without saying a word, she picked up a broom. Harold quietly picked up another soon. Others did the same, and the work continued. Some stories end with applause, some end with victory. This one ended with service, because the greatest legacy is not the wealth we leave behind, or the praise people speak about us, but the lives we quietly lift while no one is watching. And somewhere, beneath the warm morning light pouring through the stained glass windows, an old silver key rested on the communion table, no longer a symbol of a hidden secret, but a reminder that true greatness is found in humility. True strength is found in forgiveness, and the greatest servants are often the ones history almost forgets.